when the clock has started. Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, very
Well, thank you, Andrew, and welcome to the March 20, 2019 edition of Space News. This is Peter Aylward, and once again I have Tina Stagg, Michael Abdullah and Angela DeGrazia with me, all from the Space Association. Welcome, everybody, and we'll start with some more local Australian news. I love saying that. First off, Australia has joined 6 other nations in signing an international treaty committing to the construction of the world's largest science facility, the Square Kilometre Array, or SKA. The convention, signed by Australia, China, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, South Africa and the United Kingdom, will establish an entity known as the SKA Observatory. The SKA Observatory will make the final decisions on the SKA's design and will coordinate the contracts needed to build and operate the telescope and associated infrastructure. The Australian Government is investing $293 million over 10 years towards building and initially operating the SKA. Around $1 billion worth of contracts for the construction of the SKA are expected to start being awarded from late 2020 to companies and providers in the SKA's member countries, providing a substantial return on investment for those countries. The Australian component of the SKA, or SKA Low, will be the world's most sensitive low-frequency telescope, with the country perfectly positioned to host the low-frequency element of the telescope. Hosted at CSIRO's Murchison Radio Astronomy Observatory, it will initially comprise of over 130,000 antennas spread over 65 kilometres in remote Western Australia, and add more than 130 dishes to the existing Meerkat array in South Africa. SKA is designed to eventually feature up to 1 million antennas in Australia and thousands of radio dishes in South Africa. And in case you're wondering about Gilmour Space Technologies' upcoming test launch of their One Vision hybrid rocket, the company announced via Twitter last week that the Australian Civil Aviation Safety Authority had given them the green light for the test. The Gold Coast-based company is currently conducting final software checks on the launch vehicle and plans to roll out the launch site in April, so expect more updates next month. And still in Australia, the Australian Space Agency and the ACT government have set a course to further drive the growth of Australia's space sector with the signing of a Memorandum of Understanding. The MOU will establish a framework of cooperation in the development of space-related industries as the Australian Space Agency looks to strengthen the national space sector from its location in Adelaide. ACT Chief Minister Andrew Barr said that with nearly 1 in 4 Australian space industry jobs based in Canberra, the signing of the MOU ensures that the ACT's own space industry can continue to grow with the support of the agency and create more jobs here in Canberra, he said. Some of the areas of cooperation under the Memorandum of Understanding include quantum communications, deep space communications, design, test and qualification of space hardware, space situational awareness and space law. Australian Space Agency Chief Dr. Megan Clark said that all states and territories have a vital role to play in growing our space sector, and we're continually working closely with all jurisdictions across Australia as we establish our location in Adelaide. And it's over to you, Angelo.
Thanks, Peter. Let's go across to the United States and US space policy. The administration's $21 billion budget proposal for NASA de-emphasises the development of the Space Launch System. The fiscal year 2020 budget requests calls for deferring work on the Block 1B version of the SLS with its larger exploration upper stage for an indefinite period. It would instead use commercially procured rockets to launch elements of the Lunar Gateway. It also would transfer the Europa Clipper mission from the SLS to a commercial vehicle. NASA officials said they are working on a new realistic launch readiness date for the first SLS mission now expected to slip from 2020. The proposal emphasises commercial aspects of exploration, including development of larger commercial lunar landers and commercial communication services. The proposal, nearly $500 million worth, below what NASA received in 2019, makes another attempt to cancel the W1st astrophysics mission and 2 Earth science missions, as well as close the agency's education office. Yet again.
So, Angela, SLS, does that stand for Slip Launch System?
Moving on. NASA is being criticised by a wide range of individuals and organisations for the proposed cuts in its 2020 budget request. Again, as per usual. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat Senator from Maryland, criticised the latest effort to cancel 2 of the missions, PACE and W1st, as short-sighted and deeply misguided. The Coalition for Deep Space Exploration, an industry group, warned that the budget relies too much on public-private partnerships for many aspects of its exploration program, such as the development of new lunar landers. That budget proposal, though, helps provide a new momentum for the Lunar Gateway. The budget requests $821 million for the Gateway, supporting continued work on the power and propulsion element and other aspects of the human-tended facility in lunar orbit. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, in a speech last week, unveiled the budget, said there was strong international interest in the Gateway, including some existing space station partners who are considering providing elements of the facility. The ISS Multilateral Coordination Board, which oversees management of the station, released a statement endorsing the Gateway this month. Okay, over to Tina.
Thanks, Angelo, and good evening, space fans. Still with the International Space Station, a Soyuz spacecraft delivered 3 people to the station late last week. The Soyuz MS-12 spacecraft launched on schedule on a Soyuz rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, docking with the station's Rassvet module almost 6 hours later. The Soyuz brought to the station NASA astronauts Nick Hague and Christina Koch, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexei Ovchin-In, who will remain on the station until September. You'll recall that Hague and Ovchin-In were the 2 crew members aboard the ill-fated MS-10 spacecraft, which aborted shortly after launch on the 11th of October last year due to a failure of a Soyuz FG launch vehicle booster, which failed to jettison cleanly. Still with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said last week the agency is considering flying an Orion spacecraft on commercial rockets instead of its own space launch system. Bridenstine said at a Senate Commercial Committee hearing that NASA was studying the feasibility of flying the EM-1 mission, which was to be the first launch of SLS, on commercial rockets because of continued delays with the space launch system. Under the plan, 2 commercial rockets, one carrying the Orion and the other an upper stage, would carry out the mission with the Orion docking with the upper stage in Earth orbit before going to the Moon. Bridenstine said a decision on the alternative plan could be made in the next few weeks, with the goal of flying that revised EM-1 mission in mid-2020. But the following day, Bridenstine clarified that NASA was still committed to developing the SLS, even as it studies using commercial vehicles for the next Orion mission. Bridenstine told a Capitol Hill luncheon the proposal to use 2 commercial launch vehicles for the EM-1 mission was a stopgap measure to allow the mission to stay on its current schedule of mid-2020 and was not a sustainable long-term solution. The SLS being built for EM-1 could instead be used for launching other payloads, including hardware for the Lunar Gateway, while crewed Orion missions would use later SLS vehicles. The proposal to use commercial vehicles for EM-1 raised questions from industry and members of Congress. Richard Shelby, the Republican Senator for Alabama, who is chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, said after Bridenstine's announcement that he strongly believes the SLS should be used for Orion missions. Some in the industry questioned the additional costs and risk associated with the alternative mission concept as well. To Michael.
Thanks, Tina. And moving on to the US Air Force. The Air Force will be closely watching the next flights of SpaceX's Falcon Heavy. The next launch, carrying the Arabsat 6A communication satellite, is scheduled for the first half of April and will be the first launch of the rocket since its inaugural mission in February 2018. The side boosters from the launch will be reused on the following Falcon Heavy mission, the Air Force's STP-2 payload in June. This will help the Air Force understand the process for using previously flown hardware, as it considers allowing the use of reused rocket stages on future national security launches. And moving to China, the Chang'e 4 lander and Yutu-2 have powered down for a third lunar nighttime on the far side of the moon. The spacecraft went into a sleep state for the 2-week lunar night last week, nearly 2.5 months after landing in the moon's von Karman crater. Yutu-2 has now travelled 163 metres and reached its original design life, but is continuing to work well and will resume operations when the sun rises at the landing site in late March. Meanwhile, OneSpace is still on track to be the first private Chinese company to place a payload into orbit. The startup said it has completed assembly and testing of its OSM rocket and is now preparing to transport the vehicle to the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center for a launch attempt late this month. The OSM vehicle has 3 solid propellant stages and 1 liquid propellant stage and can place up to 205 kilograms into low Earth orbit. Another Chinese startup, iSpace, is preparing for the first orbital launch of its Hyperbola 1 small launch vehicle as soon as April. Staying in China, China says its heavy-lift Long March 9 rocket is on schedule for a first launch around 2030. Experts with the China Academy of Launch Vehicle Technology say they have made significant progress on unspecified key technologies for the vehicle, which is designed to place between 50 and 140 metric tons into low Earth orbit. That vehicle will be used to support human missions to the moon and other deep space exploration missions. The Japanese space agency JAXA will partner with Toyota on the design of a pressurized lunar rover. The two organisations announced an agreement last week to accelerate an ongoing joint study of the rover with an eye towards developing the vehicle by the end of the 2020s. The rover, powered by fuel cells, would be able to travel up to 10,000 kilometres on the lunar surface and carry 2 astronauts. Neither JAXA nor Toyota disclosed how much money they were spending on this phase of the project or the projected overall cost of the rover. Tina, back to you.
The United Arab Emirates Space Agency is working with Virgin Galactic to set up space tourism flights in the country. Mohammed Al-Arbabi, director of the UAE Space Agency, said his agency is in talks with Virgin Galactic about operating its Spaceship 2 suborbital vehicle from Al Ain International Airport. The airport was chosen because it has a relatively small number of commercial flights. Space tourism suborbital space flights would begin in the coming years, but the agency didn't offer a specific schedule or address issues such as US export control regulations that could pose challenges to operations there. Angelo.
Okay, more exciting news from, guess who? SpaceX. A Raptor engine has arrived at SpaceX's South Texas launch site and is being integrated with a Starship prototype vehicle. A SpaceX spokesman said the engine will be mounted on the vehicle initially for static fire tests and then tethered test flights. The Hopper vehicle will later perform low-altitude test flights as part of the overall test program for SpaceX's next-generation launch system. Okay, Peter.
All right, and finally this week, NASA has selected 9 research teams to analyse samples from the Apollo missions that have been sealed for decades. 6 of the 9 teams from NASA centres, universities and the Naval Research Laboratory will look at samples from the Apollo 15, 16 and 17 missions that have never been exposed to the Earth's atmosphere. The other 3 will look at specially curated samples from those missions. The samples were preserved from the Apollo era so that they could be studied using more advanced technology. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you, everybody, and it's back to you, Andrew.